Dr. Olson's a graduate of the University of Southern California and has directed the Center for Excellence in Writing since its inception at Penn State in December of 1997. He has a bit of a head start on us, but we're catching up. He teaches an undergraduate and graduate course in English each year and oversees the Center for Excellence in Writing's 4 programs, which I just mentioned to you. And his publication titles include The Conflict Between Assessment and Accreditation, Plagiarism Might Go Away If We Don't Talk About It, Student-Centered Assessment and Research in the Writing Center, Tutor Training, Outreach Through InReach, Writing Centers and Extended Education, A Question of Power, Why Frederick Douglass Stole Grammar, Writing Intensive Curriculum Roots, and Bibliotherapy, Autobiography, and the Psychology of Composition. He's also been president of the International Writing Centers Association and is active in that organization and many others that promote writing across the curriculum, writing program administration, and writing centers. So I welcome him today. And with that said, I turn the mic over to John.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Valerie. Thank you for coming. I met Valerie in 2002 in Savannah when I had the privilege of handing her a plaque for the best article of the year. If there were an award for the best writing center of the year, it would surely go to the University Writing Center here. I scarcely remember the early days when we talked as you were setting up this writing center, but writing is a recursive process, isn't it? And now this writing center is a model to me, and I aspire to be this good. So many interesting things going on here. I thank you so much for your hospitality. Yesterday was a very pleasant day. I also thank Paul Parrish, Jan Swearingen for their hospitality, and I thank also Thompson Learning for flying me here. Well, so here we go. Area improvisation. I like this definition of improvisation for 2 reasons. The word process, it invites us to think of composition over time. I think of an article by Peter Elbow in the June 2006 issue of the journal College Composition and Communication called The Music of Form, where he invites us to consider writing, particularly organization, but I'd say also sentence-level concerns. Consider writing not just in terms of space, words on a page, but instead in terms of time, the way we listen to music. Also the performance of improvisation, and I invite us to think of improvising together. I'd like to consider a scenario, and if we could start the music now. We'll be listening to an album called ESP 1965, where Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock, that you see here, where they were playing together. The band is the one you see here. Wayne Shorter is not pictured. But as you listen to Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock playing, and as you visualize them together on the stage, I'd like to introduce a scenario I read in the program notes as I was waiting for a concert to begin at Penn State University. Perhaps the band Dimensions in Music came through College Station. I don't know. But Herbie Hancock, Michael Brecker, and Roy Hargrove were celebrating the 75th birthday of these musicians who had influenced them so much. And while my wife Cheryl and I waited, I read the program notes. And the bio of Herbie Hancock had this experience. If you could pass out this little handout now, Valerie. Thank you. Yes. Hancock recounts, I had this experience. I was playing with Miles, and at this one point, which was like a peak in Miles' solo, I hit this chord that was so wrong. It was just awful. It was in the wrong place, and it was like, boom. I just felt like I destroyed the music. And Miles took his breath and played some notes that made my chord right. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't even play for about 2 minutes. What it taught me was that Miles didn't hear it as a mistake. He just heard it as an event. I said, wait a minute. This is a lesson not just for music, but for life. So I'm wondering, is there also a lesson here for teachers and tutors of writing? What do you think of this? Is there a lesson here for us as teachers and tutors of writing? Where's the microphone? Brady? There's a hand right here. If you can wait for the microphone, we'd appreciate it so it gets on the tape.
Well, I resent this because you're actually asking us to work at teaching writing and make this relationship with these students more or less a conversation like the music, so that when they say something, we need to respond to what we hear, not to what we think we ought to hear. And I'd much rather just correct their punctuation. Thank you.
Thank you. Her?
Hi, I'm actually a scientist that teaches a writing course, and this is actually sort of how my philosophy of teaching goes, in the sense that I give students prompts and tell them there's no correct answer, and what they need to do is defend their point of view. And they have to trust me. And over time, which is the course of a semester, they do learn to trust me, and I think feel more free about writing and defending their point of view.
So we hear trust, listening to what they're saying, not looking for what you expect.
It's about communication in that sense. This example not only exemplifies teamwork, but more so innovative spirit or innovation, which is what we want to encourage. I think it's an excellent example.
Thank you.
I think what you're asking us to do is bring the ritual back to writing. You know, when you think about improvisation's never formulated, you know? And I think a lot of times when we think about composition, we think of, okay, there's this form. And I think jazz teaches there's a form, but there's also a way to break the form for a better experience, you know? So I think what you're asking us is to kind of break form and learn how to break form with students.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, up in the front here.
I think I'm going to offer a more conservative view here. I think errors here in writing, if we compare it to improvisation, means that we can take this opportunity to explain the different implications of error in different contexts. So what would this, for example, errors in word choice and tense, right? We could take this opportunity to explain to the student the implication of this word in this context and the implication of the word in its supposed context that we were looking for. This is one point. The other point, I think, is that improvisation usually is a skill of the best musicians. So I was wondering whether you had in mind also improvisation in writing as, you know, a skill of the best writers. You know, making this comparison.
So Herbie Hancock already knew how to write in this sense, and so did Miles Davis. Well, fair enough. We'll consider that. Thank you. Are there any other?
I was thinking in a more conservative fashion also, in that when my students make errors, sometimes it creates a teachable moment. But often I try to show them that they've given a correct answer, just not to the question I asked, but to a question that can be often equally as important and sometimes even more important than the one I was thinking of. So they teach me.
So you're finding possibility in error. You also are depending on the communication that the man in the back said was important, as you explained, this error in the context. Is there one more comment up here? Oh, well, three of them go up immediately. The woman here, the gentleman here, and then over here. You have your work cut out for you this morning. Good thing you have that good T-shirt on. That gives you energy.
The thing I liked about it was that Miles Davis made it into an event. He took away the emotional loading of the mistake, if it was a mistake or an error, and then was able to do something with it. And too often it seems to me people get caught up in the angst and anxiety of the mistake they've made, and that's what would be part of what was important for me.
Okay, thank you. You could pass it over. Yes. Man in the striped shirt.
My name is Jerry Bradshaw, and I'm a chemical engineer. I think that when you have a mistake in writing, I guess my feeling is that you don't destroy the writer, but in my business, mistakes can be very costly and very deadly. So when a mistake is a technical mistake, you have to tackle the mistake, but you don't destroy the person in doing so.
Okay. And one more comment.
Hancock's experience is an illustration of how things perceived as real can be real and their consequences. So if you interpret something as a mistake or a train wreck or a disaster, that's going to have terrible consequences. If you see it as an event, an opportunity, things can work out.
Well, let's look at some conventional mistakes, the type that you'd want to explain to your students. Some common errors in student writing. I could draw from many studies now. I will look at one from Robert Connors and Andrea Lunsford, where they looked at thousands of college compositions, and they did everything they needed to do so the social scientists would think that the study was valid. And they came up with a top 20 errors, looking at surface errors. Now, I think the assumption was that these are the ones that separate us from our students. These are the ones that bother us. There was far and away one kind of error that was marked by teachers of writing most commonly, and that was spelling. There were so many more spelling errors marked that they just took that aside and dealt with it separately. So most common surface errors that teachers of writing addressed: missing comma after an introductory element. The journalists among us might dispute that. And I'll go through these quickly. Is this what you'd expect to find? A lot of comma errors. Now, in their research, they discovered the most besetting error in around 1850 1895, when Harvard University established a composition curriculum because our students couldn't write. The most troubling error in the late 19th century was the difference between shall and will. If students could only get that right, they'd be literate and they'd succeed in college. Well, in the 1950s, there was one that drove teachers nuts. The split infinitive. Star Trek may have helped us tolerate this one a bit. Now, I went to a reference book to see how these errors were faring now. And I noted in the Writer's Harbrace Handbook that the word shall has almost disappeared from contemporary English. The split infinitive, well, the advice is if it creates an awkward construction, avoid it. But it could actually help us create emphasis. So there are times when we might want to use a split infinitive. But you might say these errors are not the only ones we care about. We're not all nitpickers. I think of another study. The late, great Maxine Hairston conducted a study in the 70s where she canvassed non-academic professionals in the business community about what bothered them the most. She had 60 sentences with different kinds of errors and asked them to say, does this bother you a lot, bothers you a little, or bothers you not at all? And then, at the end, she had an open-ended question about what was the most annoying feature that came across their desk in the form of writing. Even though she had focused her study on errors of usage, she found that most professionals were concerned with errors of content. They cared about clarity and concise writing. And this is confirmed by a top 10 list of business writing problems that I found. You'll notice ambiguity. Writing not being precisely clear. Just plain being wrong. Errors of organization. Number 5, boring writing. When I was in the English department this morning, I saw a wonderful University Writing Center poster that said, I believe, like boring writing, neither does your professor. Well, neither does the professional in the business community. But the question remains, how do we address these kinds of errors of substance and content in organization in a way that takes a mistake and makes it right, the way Miles did to Herbie Hancock's error? Students are so fixated on these errors, we need to find a way to help them step back. Help them stop being an ant on a painting, as Peter Elbow invoked, and get a broader perspective. If we can convince students that these errors are of less importance than errors of content, we've removed a major obstacle in their development as writers. Now, you probably let your students know your criteria, your hierarchy of concerns, just like I do. And here's my hierarchy of concerns. I took this from Kenneth Bruffy's A Short Course in Writing that we used to use in the Writing Center peer tutoring class at Penn State. Matters of unity of purpose, theme, a controlling idea, tend to be more important than matters of mechanics. But you see, this isn't a matter of whether mechanics is important. It's when it's important. And also a matter of how we address it. It's a matter of time and timing. Now, in an effort to be concrete, I know how abstract I am with this Miles Davis scenario. I'll show you one way that I try to address the higher order concerns first. Let a student know how she's doing, but not hit them with everything at once. The ideal, I believe, would be the way Maggie responds to her students. She was telling me the other night. She writes a full single-spaced page in response to their writing. They've written her a coherent piece of writing, a unified piece of writing, so she responds in the same way. Well, many of us don't have the time, and some of us advocate using a response grid, so you can cover a lot of territory very quickly, give quite a bit of information, and then home in on the highest order of concern that needs to be addressed. Now, in order to do this, it implies that the student has time. I think of Marilyn Sternglass's longitudinal study called Time to Know Them, where she followed students at City College of New York over 6 years, followed 56 students. Her conclusion was that students need time to show their proficiency. This implies that it's better to have one assignment that we take students through in several iterations, in several steps, rather than having a lot of assignments where they just have one shot at it. But this is what I do. In my first response to a student who had written a rhetorical analysis, I tried to communicate quite a bit of information in that grid, and then pointed out something that I thought was effective in the analysis, and then asked, couldn't you do this in the other places? Also, I don't want to waste my time on students who don't care about reading my full page of single-spaced, heartfelt response. But you might say, what do you do with a student who on the first draft, the first submission draft, has a check mark in all the strong boxes? How do you get them to keep revising through these iterations? Is this a way of dumbing down the class to address the needs of the students who need all of these revisions? Well, I think this challenges us to do what Donald Diker calls learning to praise. We need to learn to rigorously find the successes in our students' papers so they jump out at us just like errors jump out at us. We need to learn to mark those successes and help students build on them. If we give them an assignment and they get everything right and there's nothing more to be done with that assignment, doesn't that point to an error in assignment design? There's no place to go from there. So I think we can learn to use time and timing so that we have time to know our least confident students as well as our strongest ones. I think of a friend I have at Penn State. He's a drummer. He's also a professor of education who told me something I found quite interesting about time and timing. As a drummer, if he loses the beat, he gets out of sync. Well, he just stops, takes a little time, and then he's able to catch up. If he keeps playing, he messes everyone up. And I think we sometimes see this in our students. They keep writing, they keep making the same errors. Davis said, the biggest challenge in improvising is to know what not to play, to take those silences, take the time, the timing. Let space become a part. of the performance. Now I'd like to move into the second part, and if someone could hand out this sheet, I'd like to change gears. I'd like to invite you to do some counting. Many of you have done this before. Do you recognize this exercise? Okay. I see one person nodding her head. When you receive this sheet, I'll give you a minute or so, and I invite you to count the squares. Then we'll take a tally. I'll just ask you to call out the number of squares you find. Count squares within a square, large ones, small ones. How many squares? And write your individual estimate on the page. Then I'll ask you to get into groups of at least 3. Talk to the people next to you. See if you can come to a consensus. How many squares? And then finally, I'll ask for a brave performer to come up and demonstrate how your group reached the number. And let's see if we can all reach a consensus. Okay? I'll give you a minute or so. Well, do we want to agree that there's 47? I know the right answer. I know there is 47.
Are there more than 47?
There were 47. There were 47.
Oxford doesn't dispute that.
Now, I know this is an artificial scenario here. For one thing, I didn't give you much time. If I'd given you all plenty of time, you probably would have gotten an accurate count by yourself. I wouldn't have, but I think many of you would have. Even though I carry this very cool calculator watch, I still wouldn't have gotten it. But despite the artificial constraints, I wonder, why would I do this within this talk? What, if anything, does this have to say about teaching of writing? This counting of squares, this process we went through.
It's not just about thinking processes as individuals, but collaboration as a whole. And if writing is a community effort, it's always a conversation, then it's got to be about collaboration. But we grade our students individually.
Yes.
You have multiple perspectives.
Oh, we need the microphone. I'm sorry, we forgot that. Multiple perspectives, you said. The first comment was about collaboration. 2 heads are better than 1. 5 heads. How many people in this room? 47 heads are better than 1. Yeah, and so that's kind of a simplistic application of it, and that is how we use this scenario, particularly when we're trying to convince students to use peer review in their classrooms. The value of getting more than one perspective. But I wish you would think for a moment about the kinds of language you used when you got into these small groups. How did you talk to one another? Now there was one person here who knew about this, and maybe she knew there were 47. I'm curious to know, Jimmy, did she just lecture to you and say, there are 47, case closed?
No, she just kept saying, why aren't you working more?
Yeah. Okay, so she's asking questions. What kinds of discourse were going on? How were you talking about this? Jimmy.
I'd just like to say that my colleague from the Dean's office here used a metaphor. He said that I was saying to him earlier I didn't know anything about budget. He said if I could do this, I could do budget. And so I think that's one way we do talk about these kinds of things, though, is metaphorically or using language about things that are familiar to us to talk about the unfamiliar.
There's another comment here.
We were more or less, well, this is what I got. Oh, you got more than me. Show me how you got it.
Yes.
It's almost a proof thing.
You're comparing.
But we didn't curse one another.
You're describing. This is what I heard. People describing, showing, demonstrating. Yes, over here in the front corner.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that the higher the number was, the more confidence you had in that. Like someone had done, if you found more, then that had to be better, as opposed to finding fewer.
That's an interesting comment. This particular exercise, it made us all feel equally insecure, I think. We had common ground, didn't we? Counting these squares, and we have many different levels of expertise in this room. Some people are more comfortable with math than others, more comfortable with counting than others. But we were solving a problem, and that seemed to bring us together. Now, there was one right answer, and in writing, there usually isn't. So again, this is an artificial part of this exercise that might not apply as well as it could. Yes, please. There's another comment. The mic person. Right over here. Have to get it on tape. So you thought you could rest for just a second. No.
This is where I'd like to point out one word I used earlier, in that it's about community and community consensus. Here there's a right answer, but in writing, you still, it is about community, and the community has to decide what's okay, what's right for that community, which is why I really like this particular exercise. And I'm going to run to class and use it.
And Valerie has a comment up here at the front.
To me, it was about perception and expertise as well. I knew I didn't have the expertise. I knew what I would do, 1, 2, 3, 4, and wouldn't see the other squares. But it's also about perception, and I think writing an error is also somewhat about perception. What do we perceive as an error, and we don't always perceive the same things as errors.
There was a moment in the history of teaching writing, 1970. Open admissions. Suddenly waves of students were coming into our universities, and they were different. What are we going to do? There were teachers at City College of New York, like Mina Shaughnessy, who tried to sort this out. There were other gifted teachers there you may be familiar with. Adrienne Rich was there at this time. Poet and critic June Jordan. Hunkering down to figure out how do we meet the needs of these students. Well, Mina Shaughnessy eventually grew weary of hearing faculty complain about these students and talk about them in terms of their deficits and where they had stalled in Piaget's scheme of development. You know, they only write at the 4th grade level, or something like that. So she turned the tables. She wondered, should we only assume that students react to professors, learn from their professors. Do professors change in reaction to their students? She, in a short article called Diving In, a developmental scale for teachers, and she found that when teachers would meet these students for the first time, they had a defensive reaction. She used the metaphor guarding the tower, protecting themselves from these students. They didn't know what to do, but they didn't belong in higher education. They would compromise the of our professions. But then, as the faculty tried to imagine how on earth they were going to get away with failing an entire class of students, they started communicating, and as time went on, they began to see possibilities in their students. Maybe a few of them had, maybe they could be converted, just a few of them, through hard work and attention to the forms that the professor holds dear. They could learn to speak and write like the professor. Perhaps some of them could be converted. But as the process in class continues and students and teacher come to know one another better, Shaughnessy saw a third developmental stage where the teachers realized that just showing the correct forms of expression, taking examples, showing how they're constructed in professional writing and asking students to imitate those examples. When the students didn't learn, the teachers began to ask, well, what's going on here? Why aren't they learning? They're actually smarter than I thought they were at the beginning, and they bring a lot to this classroom. So the third stage was sounding the depths, the teachers beginning to look at herself, look for ways to improve as a teacher, and also start listening to the students. The fourth stage that Shaughnessy hoped we would all reach is a risky one, but it's one where the teacher truly becomes a student in the classroom herself, diving in as a writer with your students. This is a student-centered classroom when the professor is a learner as well. This takes a position that one of the most effective teaching stances is a learning stance. Shaughnessy invites us to learn from our students. And in fact, this is what she did. She wrote a very important book in rhetoric and composition called Errors and Expectations, where she pointed out that most student errors have a logic behind them. Students don't make errors because they're idiots. Of course, we're all careless and we make mistakes. Just yesterday, I noticed a typo I'd made in my PowerPoint, and thank goodness Valerie gave me access to her computer and I corrected it. There are usually good reasons for making these errors. We have a lot to learn from our students, and if we develop as writers and as teachers with them, we have this kind of community where students will identify themselves as writers along with their teachers. I'm sorry I got behind in my notes here as I warmed to the topic. The rhetorician I think of as the most influential in the 20th century, and in this one, said that we persuade others by identifying our ways with theirs. There are so many things in this postmodern existence that separates us, that fragments us. Errors separate us, as I said at the beginning. They separate us as writers from our audiences. Burke made the point that identification can help us overcome the separation. It can help us move from the factional to a community of writers. I mentioned the study conducted by Maxine Hairston back in the 70s. Recently, Lori Gray and someone named Huser, I forgot her name right now, sentence fragments were at the top of the very serious errors. Gray and Huser found that it had completely dropped off the list. But more importantly, they found the conclusion that I've repeated here, this long quote, and forgive me for putting all this text on a PowerPoint, but I think it's telling. They find a tolerance, but it's not a tolerance that says anything goes. It's a tolerance that notes that there isn't any such thing as a standard. There is standardization. Someone has standardized the language. Someone did it based on certain reasons that change over time. We need to recognize the arbitrariness of usage rules and how easily they change, and work with our students to overcome these dichotomies, the identity politics of good writer and bad writer, and look at language conventions together, examine our expectations together with our students, and work together to define the features of our communities. Teachers and students together. Teachers and students performing together on a stage, like we witnessed at the beginning of this talk. Students and teachers seeing errors as possibility. I'd like to end with the words of Sun Ra. He actually came from Saturn. Maybe you didn't know this. He's an extraterrestrial. You see, you think of an ant on a painting. Sun Ra had a deep perspective from outer space. He's a jazz keyboardist. You may be familiar with him, a band leader. But he said, you made a mistake. You did something wrong. Now make another mistake and do something right. Thank you very much.